All right. Hello, thank you all for coming out. My name is Daniel Dewey. I'm with the Oxford Martin Program on the Impacts of Future Technology. And I'm very pleased this evening to introduce Dr. Joanna Bryson. Dr. Joanna Bryson is a reader in the Department of Computer Science at the University of Bath. She's associate editor for Adaptive Behavior and on the editorial boards of the International Journal of Synthetic Emotions, the Journal of Mind Theory, Connection Science, and AI and Society. Joanna's principal academic interest is understanding human behavior, culture, and natural intelligence more broadly. And her main methodology for doing this is designing intelligence systems to model and test scientific theories. I want to remind everyone that in the interest of disseminating information, this talk is being live cast on the web and being recorded. And the question and answer session afterwards will also be recorded. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce Joanna Bryson.
Get out of my own slides. Thank you very much for having me here. And with respect to the webcast, I have to apologize to anyone who's watching it that I apparently have a Mac from the only year that we couldn't do a direct feed. So they've had to download a PDF of my slides in advance to see this. We couldn't webcast simultaneously. But that affects no one in the room, and that's who I'm going to talk to the rest of the talk, I promise. All right. So, yeah, the intelligence explosion. I couldn't find a picture of intelligence exploding. So it's but I'm going to do a quick whirlwind tour to what I'm going to talk about, and then I'll start talking. Well, first of all, I'm going to talk about what is the intelligence explosion, and that will actually come out over the entire course of the 40 minutes I have. Don't expect it right at the very beginning. And then, of course, the main question is whether this really is an existential threat to humanity. So I don't really want to go up against Stuart Russell and Stephen Hawking, but I promised to, months ago in the abstract, so I'll give some effort. And this is the main thing that I think is new for those of you who have been used to talking about the intelligence explosion. I think there's been a little too much emphasis, at least in the recent press, not in the entire history of the debate, on the extent to which artificial intelligence is a part of the intelligence explosion. And so I'm going to be bringing more of both a computer science and a biological perspective into what is intelligence and how much is the fact that we use artifacts, how is that actually going to change the phenomena that's being studied here. All right, so again, this is still the whirlwind introduction. Werner Vinge is the first person I ever heard talking about the singularity or the intelligence explosion. I heard him in 1995. But he'd been actually writing about it at least since 1983. And he basically emphasized just the idea that when machines get smarter than people, we're in trouble. And I still hear a lot of people talking about this. I suggest that these people try to do math better than their phones. Right? Now this is going to get back to what do you think is intelligence? But the telephones can probably play games. They can probably beat you if you turn the AI too far up. And they can certainly do arithmetic better than we can do. And they haven't even taken over our pockets yet, right? So, and I think that's a really great joke, and I have to give credit where it's due. That's actually Alan Bundy's joke. I heard it when he was debating Kevin Warwick back in the 90s. And Kevin Warwick explicitly talked about robots taking over the world. But if we go back to the origins of the term intelligence explosion, it's not just about being smarter than us. The particular concern is the self-improving machine intelligence. And Daniel was just here, not here, in Bath, visiting me, and that was his emphasis. It's the particular problem that if things are making themselves smarter, and they're doing it really, really fast, just like our calculators do arithmetic really, really fast, is that going to become something we can't possibly get a handle on? And so, there's Daniel. And so what the main problem here is exponential growth. And I'm actually going to talk a bit about this to help you guys get an idea, your head wrapped around what that is. That's one of the main things as a computer science lecturer we spend time trying to get our students to understand. And I still find it surprising sometimes in PhD students, the not seeing when they've bumped up into this particular problem. So the outline. I'm going to start out talking about the definition and computational properties of intelligence. Then I'm going to get into the biology of intelligence. And we're going to look at how the advent of intelligence has affected biological life, the ecosystem, evolution. All right, and we're going to take that as a precedent, and then at the end, probably that middle part is going to be the longest. A relatively short part is we're going to apply those lessons into our current situation and do the prognosticating, which I agree with Andres that that's always the dangerous part anyway, so let's keep that short. Okay. But before I go too far, my first degree is psychology, and one of the things that I see a lot when people have, when they talk about consciousness, when they talk about AI, when they talk about morality, there's a lot of things which come down to what we in psychology call identification. So this is a freaky image, and it's even freakier if I put up the GIF and you saw this. It's basically a doll, but it's called a robot, and it dances. You shake it a little bit, and the way it's set up makes it look like a human dancer, but not entirely. And it's really disturbing. And why is it disturbing? It wouldn't be disturbing if we didn't think it looked kind of like a person, if we didn't both identify and not identify with it at the same time. So it's us. We care about us. And we may think we're caring about like these machines or other things, but we care to think about things a lot to the extent with which we identify with them. And in particular, I found, even talking with professional philosophers, in fact, I've been told by a senior professor of philosophy, the problem with people like you and Dennett is that you want to take the notion of a soul out of consciousness. Yes, of course I do. I'm a computer scientist. I take things apart and then I build them again. That's what I do. So I realize that may not be what you want to do, but I'm going to treat all these things as separable. Okay? Correlation is not equal to causation. Some of these things may introduce other things, but let's just for the period of this 30 minutes, I think it is, yeah. These are the things I'm going to talk mostly about, intelligence and agency. I'm not going to talk about the others, well, a little bit about language and morality, but not at all about consciousness and not at all about divinity. All right, so don't worry about that. And I ask some of you to take this on for the 30 minutes. At Q&A, you can switch back to however you like to think, but just to understand, and then you can attack me, that's fine. But just for the sake, suspend your disbelief for a minute and try to go really, really functionalist for the rest of this talk. All right. So, definition of computational properties. Let's get back to the exponential thing. I know you probably know this, but just to get through your head, if you have one thing, it splits. You have two, then you have 4, 6, 8, 16. And then somehow in 9 months you can go from this to that, right? It's amazing, and that is amazing. That's incredible. How many cells are in this in 9 months of splitting, right? But that's nothing, all right? We can think about, because the base, that's just if you're splitting, you only have a base 2 there. So 2 to the n number of replications. Sorry, I have to get filled again. All right, we can put 9 at the bottom there, and we have tic-tac-toe, or noughts and crosses. All right, you didn't laugh at that one. But I couldn't find a picture, and I was too lazy to draw one myself, that actually showed how this just shoots, expanding out much faster than the drawing that you just saw. Now, of course, with noughts and crosses, the reason you have 9 possible moves in the first place is there's 9 places to go, but then there's only 8, and then there's only 7. So actually, this becomes tractable, and it's very easy, well, very easy. There's some pretty nice pages on it on the web. It's pretty easy to just to record every single possible game and to know which is the optimal game and to have a computer play tic-tac-toe perfectly. That's pretty easy, but it's still expanding faster than what I just showed you, right? Now let's talk about chess, all right? Now chess is different for 2 reasons. There's more different kinds of pieces, but more importantly, when you move onto a space, the space doesn't go away. You might move off it again, all right? But even if we restrict ourselves to games that only have 35 moves on each side, there's already more possible chess games than there are atoms in the universe, all right? This is just chess. Right? I don't think I need to say this, that there's a lot of other things people can do besides the moves of chess. And does anyone recognize this movie? It's the original Thomas Crown Affair. So he's got his hand up there. There's about to be another move that's off the table, literally. All right, so anyway, yeah. So some definitions, I promised you, so let's give them. An agent is just something that changes the environment or acts, right? There are chemical agents. They just make things change. That's not a big deal. A robot, we're not going to talk about robots, but I left this in just because people like robots. Robots are artifacts that with physical actions in real time in response to their own perception. So your iPhone is a robot. It's sensing when you drop it, it's sensing when you shake it. It proactively sets off alarms and wakes you up. It's kind of a boring robot from the perspective that it doesn't have arms and legs, but it's really interesting in terms of how smart it is. And the intelligence. Intelligence is a goal-directed capacity to link context to actions, perception to action. That's all I need for intelligence, all right? I've left consciousness out, I've left morality out, I've left all those things out, and I've said that's intelligence, just that's a disbelief part. If you like that, and Anthony Travavis, I'm not Welsh, but he gave me the slides. I've met him. He's fantastic. And he does a great David Attenborough at this point because he can remember the name of the daughter there. It smells its victim and it's going to pounce in a minute. But I don't do David Attenborough very well. Anyway, but yes, both of these plants are actually one sensing light, the other one sensing another plant by pheromones. And they're both growing towards the thing they're sensing. So you could call that cognitive if you wanted. There was sensing, there was action. You could even say there's a bit of memory in terms of the memory is just where the cell structure is, right? So you've grown a particular way, and that's where the sun used to be pointed, right? So it's very restricted kind of intelligence, but it's a kind of intelligence. So why are we stupid? I know I don't mean to insult you, but everybody can't find their keys or something, and then they're right there, and you think, why, right? Why are we stupid? That thing that I just told you about with the chess, it's called combinatorics in computer science. It is the exponential explosion, not of intelligence itself, of the possible things you can do. That's what's incomprehensibly large, all right? And so, there's a difference. You can do mathematics, so you can prove certain kinds of things aren't computable. They're beyond, there's just no way to figure them out. But a lot of other things, like chess, are technically computable, but they're not tractable. They would take longer than the universe is old to do them. And that's a different kind of problem. All right. However, you might have noticed we're not that stupid, right? We've got nice buildings, we have laptop projectors. How do we have all these great things? The main solution to combinatorics, that big explosion, is concurrency. All right? So we have billions of agents trying to find good solutions. Right now, 7 billion apes. Apes are really smart, right? Trying to find solutions, and we all look at different ones. Okay? Now, there's a problem with concurrency. One is, how do you divide the problem up in the first place? So how do you make sure the apes aren't all doing the same thing? And the second one is how do you recognize and communicate the solution? That's actually two problems. I've just stuck it on one line because, PowerPoint. So recognizing and communicating the solution if one agent finds it, okay? So, you're probably waiting for me to give an answer, but I'm not going to. That's computer science. We figure out what's hard, right? And I could tell you, if you wanted to, how people solve that in parallel architectures. But I think more relevant to the intelligence explosion is let's get into biology. So let's talk about how biology solves that problem. So how do you divide the problem up? Well, basically, you start from where you already are, and then you move forward. You take an existing solution, and you innovate new solutions that are kind of similar to it. In particular, if the solution worked well, you explore more around that solution. You try to find a better one. Okay? And how do you recognize and communicate the solutions if one's agent finds it? By living. Okay? The ones that live are the ones that have reasonably good solutions. And if you didn't recognize it, that's Darwinian evolution. All right? So you can think of Darwinian evolution as a form of concurrent search across an enormous combinatorial explosion of possibilities. Right? Now, you might think, I didn't come here for a biology lesson, but we're going to get to intelligence really soon. All right, this slide. All right? So you can think of evolution itself as learning. That's what I just told you about. It's about finding solutions. And notice those plants, okay, I said they were intelligent, but they don't have brains, right? That was hard-coded in their genetics, the capacity to do that. Yeah, well, they do grow, and so they are plastic. It's called phenotypic plasticity. It means that the individual is accumulating information. It's not just this accumulation in the genetics and the actual evolution, but there's change, all right? So we can't get the stuff that we learn. You know, we learn English. We don't put that into our eggs and our sperm, and then our children know English too. But the information we have can get influenced what genomes are passed on combined. And so now we're into the beginning of first of 3 simulations. Let me see. Yeah, probably I can get through all of them. I'm talking fast, and we'll get back to I promise we'll get back to the AI soon. So this is actually one of the first uses of agent-based modeling. So using AI to test something that had been hypothesized. Apparently, whoever was president of the Royal Society, which I know I should know, in 1896 or 1895, said, guys, this Darwinian evolution seems great, but we know the Earth is only 5 million years old. Could we really have gotten this many different species in 5 million years with this simple process? And actually, 3 different people came up with the same solution, but Baldwin was the best known at the time, and so his name has gotten stuck onto it. Said, well, maybe learning helps you accumulate information about the quality of your genome or something, and they didn't know about genomes yet. and that can accelerate the process of evolution. So him and Nolan, I think Nolan was a master student, and Jeff Hinton is the Jeff Hinton, the guy that did deep learning. That's a big deal right now. They did a simple simulation where each agent had sort of 20 alleles in their genotype, and they were born basically with, at the beginning, they all had 25 of the right kind of allele that was arbitrarily called to be adaptive, and 25% of the wrong allele, and 50% flexible. And what flexible meant was that during the lifetime of the agent could keep flipping coins, and if it happened to ever come up with all right alleles, it would stop. It recognized it was winning, and it would just breed more from that period on. So they still breed, even if they have some of the wrong kind, but they only get reinforced if they got absolutely the right thing. And this is a pathological case. Most people don't think evolution could solve this kind of case. It's first of all, so unlikely that you'd find the perfect combination. You suddenly have a bird that flies or something, right? But secondly, even if you did happen upon it, because of the nature of how sex and reproduction work, you would overshoot it. So this is extremely hard to do it just with evolution. But when you add that learning onto it, this is what happens over really very few generations. You quickly select out the wrong, so there's none of the wrong alleles going. So that's not surprising. You select against the wrong alleles. But what's interesting is that, so this is the flexible, this is the intelligence. So notice, there's a reason, all right? We're talking about the intelligence explosion, how do we contain it? Here is intelligence being selected against, all right? So it's better to be certainly right than it is to be capable of being wrong, all right? So if we didn't have this in the first place, we would never have gotten anywhere. But well, I'll show you another graph. Okay, so this was actually done by a master student of mine, Marius Richards, during his MSc. It's a replication, but let me show you this up here. As I said, some people consider this a very artificial case. This is a very famous paper. What Marius did was expanded this to the case where maybe if you only have 1 wrong, you still get some reinforcement. Maybe if you only have 2 wrong. But anyway, the point is that this line here, the y-axis is the number of generations until you have 10% of the agents doing the right thing. Okay? And you can see that the red line down here is if you add learning in, and the green line up there is just ordinary genetic algorithm. And so even just to get to 10%, you can see this massive win from having learning, especially in the harder case where it was less likely to find the right solution. So learning is a massive acceleration on top of simple evolution because it gives you more information about how close you were. The probability that you're going to find, that you have a higher probability of finding the right solution because you're a plastic individual. All right? So, but there's something else that's really important about this too, and this is going to be important when we talk about containing the intelligence explosion as well. This is basically the speed with which you're learning. And right where you're doing that flip over there, you're really speeding up the learning. But right at the end here, after, this is how many ones, so how many good alleles you found. Right at the end, there's suddenly deceleration. It's actually slowing you down relative to regular evolution. Why is that? So it's a little. Why is it a slow? That was entirely Mario's, as you can tell him if you see him. It was cute. Anyway, the reason it's slowing down is because at this point, almost every agent is going to learn it in their lifetime. Remember, it had 1,000 shots, and it's only got a couple things to learn. So at this point, having learning in the agent, instead of making it select faster towards the solution, is helping maintain diversity in the environment. Okay? So that's important. It's in life's interest to maintain diversity, where I define life as something that's trying to keep repeating itself and be in the future. All right? So we know, Daniel was the one who taught me this, sitting in the audience here, that this is actually Fisher's fundamental theorem. The rate of evolution is the amount of a variation that's identical. All right? So what that means is that when you're more stressed, you should produce more varied offspring, and when you're winning, you should get a little more conservative and say, okay, I don't need to do that because I'm near a peak. But anyway, the point is that evolution helps life deal with change, and life has to do that because the planet keeps changing. All right, including just right now, life is what's changing the most. But anyway, other things can happen too. Individual plasticity damped selection when the population was converging too much to a fitness peak, so that's actually good too. So, and this is a bottom line, which people sometimes find mysterious, but I hope I've just made it clear. The capacity to evolve well also evolves. So things that help you maintain variation are also things that will be selected for, because the species that have them will also be more likely to perpetuate into the future. All right? So that's the end of one phase. I want to go a little bit more into the intelligence in nature. So reset a second. Chimpanzees. These are some of the smartest things we have in nature. And they're, for example, much smarter than ants. And therefore, there's lots more chimpanzees than ants. And of course, ants are much smarter than bacteria. And there's lots more ants than bacteria. Right? No, wrong. Right? Okay. Even if you count humans as a kind of chimpanzee, there's still a lot more ants. All right? So in nature, intelligence hasn't exploded all over the place. Well, it kind of is, and we'll get to that. But before humans, we see a lot of diversity, and we see a lot of the solutions running at the same time. So when you find this kind of diversity in a contemporary ecosystem, occasionally there'll be somebody, like humans right now, that have got a leg up. But generally, there's this assumption, which is neutrality. Everybody who's there, got there, that you see around you is probably doing okay, right? They're all doing pretty well. And so why are they all there? There's some kind of fitness trade-off, okay? So this is just a hypothesis. This is highly controversial, but one such thing might be intelligence versus frequency of reproduction. Because remember, I showed you that selection that Hinton and Nolan had found. Basically, when you get the genetic evolution, you've got it sort of compiled in. You've got hard-coded. You know that it's going to be there for you. So to the extent that's a good thing, it might be better not to be plastic. So it may be that in order to fully exploit the incredible brains that apes have, well, these things live, well, like us. They live about 40 years. And I think orangutans take about 8 years to get to sexual maturity. I don't remember chimps are maybe 6 or 8 years. So meanwhile, these bacteria are, right out the gate, right? They're able to reproduce later the same day. So I'm going to give you another simulation. It's on a slightly different topic, but it's going to illustrate some more of this idea of trade-offs. And it's not a completely random topic, because again, getting back to the intelligence explosion and what AI has contributed to human society, it's on the topic of giving away information. All right? So this is a simulation with a master student who is not here in the audience, Ivana Chacha. So we built, yeah, I just said that. Sorry, let's get on this. So the idea is that you're living in it's actually a sort of a donut world. So the left and right part of the screen wrap, and the top of the bottom parts of the screen. So it's just like a lot of little dots running around. And there's all different kinds of food. In this case, let's say that there's like 8 kinds of food. And you have about a 5% chance of learning how to eat a new type of food. They're all born knowing how to eat one kind of food, so they don't all starve before the culture gets bootstrapped. But for the special foods, like maybe you know how to graze grass, but you don't know how to open a coconut. And you have about a 5% chance in your entire life of figuring out on your own how to open a coconut. But if somebody else tells you how to do it, then you just get it. And whether you could think of this as talking, or you could just think of it as imitating. That if you see someone, if they don't hide the fact, how do you open the coconut, then you can get it. Now the cost, why is this altruism? If you give away, hey, you know, coconuts are actually food and you can break into them, then there's going to be fewer coconuts for you. All right? So this is an altruistic act. But nevertheless, you get fixation. And so now this is a slightly complicated graph. On this is just time across the bottom. On the left, it's the proportion of talkers, isn't quite the right word, of the communicators. The red line is showing that we go from 0 with a little bit of mutation, and we wind up at basically fixation. Because there's still mutation, it wiggles, but it keeps going up. On the right is the average amount of information. Now these things are living for 50 cycles each. And they're talking the whole time. They get to talk about one thing per cycle, but they only get up to a cumulative culture of about 3 things. But remember that on their own, 5% of them would have learned one thing. So that's actually a significant accumulation of information just from listening in these cultures. Okay, so first of all, if it's so easy to get altruism, why isn't it ubiquitous? It is. People, if they think, again, this is like consciousness and it's like intelligence. People don't want to believe it's around them, but it's all, look, there's a whole bunch of apes in one room. We're not fighting, we're not mating. We're sitting here, I'm giving you information and you're being skeptical and wondering when the robots come back. But anyway, we've known this for a long time. It was sort of a version of Hamilton's 1964 paper on social behavior. And actually, if you read past the title of The Selfish Gene, that's what the rest of the book is about. People get really stuck on the title, but the whole rest of the book is about the fact that even though genes are selfish, you get cooperative behavior. Every organism is a multi-gene organism, so it's all cooperative. Right, so back to the trade-offs. That's what I promised you. Here's one example of a trade-off, trade-off, at least there's variation here. If you live a shorter amount of time, then the information, you won't have time to gather as much information, so you plateau at only about 2 things instead of about 3 things, and so you have much weaker selection for the altruism, although you still get there. But so if we extend the lifespan, so you might think, well, why doesn't everything live forever? That's where I was saying it was controversial, but the main theory is that you're competing with your offspring, and your offspring should be one step above you. But anyway, in the evolutionary ladder, but we'll see. I want to make a point here because this is again going to come back to what AI is doing. Communicating faster is similar to living longer. So it's easier to find cooperative solutions when you can transmit information. And this is actually what Daniel's PhD, a big part of what Daniel's PhD is about that's just coming out. Daniel Taylor's sitting there. So he's like looking around. But okay, but here's some of the other things that trade off of that. Knowing a lot of stuff, being a cognitive species, correlates with long life, slow maturation, so again, you can't reproduce for a bunch of time, being large, and there not being very many of you. So these are all the kinds of trade-offs, and so whenever you have a trade-off, you have a diversity of approaches. So you can have a lot of small things that, and therefore you're safer if, I don't know, an asteroid hits or something, you're more spread out, or if a predator comes in or something. Or you could be smarter and you can try to outmaneuver the predator or the asteroid. All right, finally, how am I doing? I'm supposed to stop in 10 minutes, aren't I? Dan? Yeah. I'm doing, okay. Do I have 10 minutes or 15?
Let's give it 15.
Okay, good. Okay, I'll give you this. This is a new model I just made for you. I wasn't sure if I'd get this far. So one thing that people may know, some people consider this a huge crisis, is that human fertility has been falling lately in quite a lot of countries, like most of Europe. All right? And people say, how can this be? Again, evolution should mean that you would want to have as many children as possible. And it's not just because of birth control. If you guys are on Twitter, I strongly advise to follow Hans Rosling. He's amazing. But one of the things that he was broadcasted in the last couple of years is it's a finding. It doesn't seem to be as dependent on when birth control comes into a country as it is when a woman can expect her child, that basically the number of children that die falls below 1, the average, the expected infant mortality rate. And then they switch from having about 5 children to having about 2 children. Okay, which is a substantial change, right? So I'm going to show you a simulation of 2 different strategies. One is that you invest more quickly in poorer children, basically, so they're a little weaker, or you sort of save up for richer children. And I'll give you the answers anyway, especially for the people at home that can't see the simulation. The saving strategy results in more childlessness. So there's more people that die without ever having children. Did I spell that right? Yeah, okay. And also periods of negative growth. But it wins in long term as long as the world is relatively safe. You're making more investment per child, and then you get it. So let's have a look at this. And I totally, there we go. Just to prove that my computer geek credentials, I have Emacs up as well. All right. So, whoops. No, you gotta love it. Okay. So, here's the world. The bunnies are the ones. The white ones. It's not like okay. The white ones are the ones that are investing more, and the yellow ones are the ones that are investing less in their offspring, and you can tell this here by the birth threshold. So the bugs are willing to have babies if they have an energy level of 6, and the bunnies are only going to have the birth if it's 14. They're actually rabbits, but I think bugs and bunnies is funnier. I'm sorry, I have a sense of humor issue. All right, so let's watch what happens, and we'll just speed this up a little bit. Oh, and I forgot to tell you, there's climate change. So everything's going to go well. I have turned climate change on, and there's a period of stability, but then it goes into drought. See, ooh, that was nasty. Poor animals, but now they're back. Okay. Let's see if I can find my mouse. So let's see what's happening here. So the getting out of the gate, the bugs are doing well. Can you see the yellow? It's a little hard to see. I'm sorry I didn't choose the right color. But the bunnies are doing well after a little while. So after a few cycles of this, maybe I should stop this so we can talk about this. Okay. So, right. So initially, it's a better strategy. You can have children faster. So there's the yellows going up like that, right? But look, during the drought, you take a much harder hit because your kids all die, unfortunately, because hard times have happened and you made poor kids. So now these guys have got a bit of an advantage, and they build almost as well, and then eventually they just overtake, and they go to fixation. All right, so that's the actual numbers of individuals. What is this graph down here? This is actually, again, one of these confusing graphs where there's 2 different things going on. I apologize. One of them is, this is the proportion of individuals dying childless. These 2 colors you can barely see. And this is the average fecundity, okay? So the blue, and that's sort of a pale top, are the bunnies, and the red and the orange are the bugs. If I got that right? No, I don't. No, the orange is the bunnies, okay? But, so let's look at these 2 things separately. Now this is net logo, so if you see this number over on the left, here is 1, okay? All I need to show you about this is that the bunnies, the ones what is the probability, the proportion dying childless, it's consistently above the guys who are having the fewer, right? So substantially more, it's about like half. For both of them, it's around half, but substantially more and consistently more are dying childless of the high investment strategy. And okay, now where's 1? I'll look over here. Okay, so right about there is 1. So you see that they both go through periods where fairly long periods where there's actually negative population growth, so that the expected number of offspring per parent is less than 1. But that's more true of the high investment strategy. But then it makes up for it by, well, persisting, living through these hard times, and also there's higher peaks as well when an opportunity comes. Right? So that's what it looks like right now. Right now, we're in a period where we are producing less than 1, at least in Europe. But is that actually a bad thing? I don't think it's probably a bad thing, but we'll get to that in the third part of the talk, which we're almost to. In fact, I think that is the last slide of this. So let's go back to the talk. All right, so, and those of you at home, you can kind of see those lines I was just describing there. So, anyway. So, the threats of AI and whether these can be regulated. This was the thing you signed up for, and it's the relatively, we're back to my favorite picture of the explosion. So, issues for the intelligence explosion. One is that if you really think that having a bunch of smarter machines around is going to wipe us out, that thing about the ants and the bacteria, and actually Werner Vinge said this, I think he said this in the first time I saw him talk. I haven't quite worked out whether we're going to be like cockroaches running around in the machine, or if we're going to be wiped out. Why would we be wiped out? There's this idea, with the machines just exploit every possible thing. I think life is more robust than that. I think we would. So I guess I'm more on the E&M Banks theory that there might be these spaceships, and maybe they'd even bother to talk to us. But I'm not saying I'm predicting that. I'm just saying that if there was superintelligence, why would it wipe out humans or even give us a significantly different life? We don't see that in biology. Well, okay, we'll talk about that later. The next thing is robustness and resource constraints. So would we ever produce an AI, and those of us who've seen our undergraduate computer science projects, that would actually be so self-repairing and more robust that it could basically cause huge amounts of problems to us. Now, I realize that this is, we could talk about flash crashes and what happened in 2008, and that did disrupt a lot of people, and people did die. So we have things, we become dependent on our technological infrastructure, and the more dependent on that, and the harder we have time we have predicting it, that is an issue. But in terms of actually AI taking over and wiping out people, of actual existential threat, coltan is that stuff that's in your phones that we go and have wars in Congo over, right? There's not that much of it. So I'm saying, are there resource constraints on this? But then the other thing is just probability of the things that we need to worry about. So nuclear war, there's a reason why I have this picture besides that it's kind of gorgeous. But we have enough, I think it's another slide, I'll get there. The nuclear war, Ice Nine, have you guys read Kurt Vonnegut, Cat's Cradle? So sort of nanotech, somehow, say you invented nanotechnology to eat all the carbon and then it ate the whole world. To me, that's more likely than robots taking over the world. Bird flu, right? The Spanish flu killed how many people only a century ago? That happens. These things happen. Asteroids do wipe out entire planets. Is AI going to kill us before these things kill us? Which is more likely? And do we really need to worry and fixate on a point that the E&M Bank's future or something? What if he was slightly, but not very too optimistic, right? That's not, I think this isn't the biggest concern, and I think that AI probably helps increase our survival chances against these other things. So the main issue for this sort of common, and I know that there's a more complex version of the intelligence explosion, and this is one I really like out of Nick Bostrom's recent work, this idea of the orthogonality thesis. And part of the reason I love it is because I actually said that about real-time AI that actually works in 2000. But there's several pieces you need besides just intelligence and knowledge and things like that, coordination. There's a fundamental piece, which is how is your action selection happening at the highest level? What are the goals? And that's separable. And so in Bostrom's paper, he's saying, oh, well, actually, since calculators haven't taken over our pockets because they don't have morality, and so maybe that is separate from just getting intelligent, and we shouldn't treat it mathematically as all one thing. Maybe we need to think of these kinds of intelligence as different. There's another issue that I have against a lot of the things I see in the press, which is about responsibility. I think you see a lot of people, and we're very excited. This goes back to identity. We want to have children. We want to be gods. I don't know. We want to create things that are at least as good as we are, maybe even better. And so we talk about, and you can find lots of blogs about how great it's going to be that the AI will take over from us. Responsibility comes with the great power of culture. I mean, literally, we didn't have the concept before we got language. But now we do. We know what's going on. We are self-aware. We're aware of the processes. We are the authors of AI. There's never been something else out there. So we should make intelligent decisions about how we release this stuff, which is, again, part of the point of some of the institutes here. Okay, so when is I did promise I would talk about when the intelligent explosion happened, past tense. Right? So if you believed all that stuff I said about plants, if you believe that intelligence can be decomposed into things like motivation, action, memory, learning, and reasoning, then all these things, the invention of the pulley, the invention of writing is off-board memory. It's a cognitive system, right? And when we figured that out, we've been going relatively steady state. Our brains were getting bigger, but in terms of numbers of individuals, we've been going almost, not entirely steady state, but for millions of years. And then about 60, 80,000 years ago, we start having art. And then 10,000 years ago, we get urbanization, we get doctrinal religion, we get writing, and we get agriculture, and we get this line going up. Our population suddenly starts taking off, all right? So this, to me, is the intelligence explosion. And I would argue, and I know that, if you talk to Harvey Whitehouse, it was religion was the first thing, and somebody else will probably talk about agriculture being the first thing. But I'm an AI person, so I'll say it was probably the writing. Well, okay, because once you can write, and actually also the increase in demography, I also agree with the UCL crowd. Once you can write, you can start taking the risk of trying different things. You don't have to just remember exactly how to make a stone axe out of the fear that you forget and the skill is lost. Now you can write it down, remember it, and you can do more innovation. And so it allows you to explode your capacities. So AI enhances human power, and the real problem is not about AI taking over, it's governing AI-enhanced humans. And I am not the first person to say that, but I think not enough people are saying that, and too many people are still thinking of AI as the prime actor. So to me, this is the real intelligence explosion, as I said before. This is all taken from a Bardowski paper from PNAS in 2008, but this one's also a very nice paper. It doesn't sound as good as pictures. So I'll walk through these just very quickly. Let's see, where do I want to start? Yeah, let's start on the left. The left one is, no, I don't want to, yeah, I'll start here. Sorry, I'm going to start this one. Megafauna, that means just large animals you can actually see, all right? So the number of species, as humans go across the Earth, the number of species falls, all right? And that's just number of species. And against the number of species versus human population. But now the rest of these are log-log, okay? That was the only non-log-log one. If you look over there, the upper left one, that's the biomass. The megafauna biomass is dropped, but then it's kind of leveled off, while the human biomass has gone up. And the interesting thing here is this cumulative version. So you'll find a lot of papers talking about, right now the biomass is higher than it's ever been. So this is when you combine the human and the other animals and the plants and whatever. And that's because we're extracting so much the oil, the coal and things. So we're at an unsustainable amount of life in general, not only human life right now, because we'll burn through that. So this was probably the sustainable level back, pre-human. This is, let's see, yeah. Which is the one that's the, yeah, this one. It's kind of similar. If you include livestock, so if you don't look, that's if you combine, let's see, humans and megafauna, right. So humans and megafauna are only this far, which is what the other graphs were. This is when you include livestock. So it's even more stuff that we're doing. Anyway, that's the complicated scientific one. Go ahead and look it up, or just have a look at XKCD, ever useful. So this is the megafauna, the large animals on the planet. The gray ones in the middle are us, the dark gray ones. The light gray ones are all our animals. They're helpful, these are the sheep here. And the little tiny green ones is what's left in the wild. Okay? So when I read about, again, a nice Nick Bostrom paper about paper clips, we aren't turning the world into, I'm not worried about machines turning the world into paper clips. People are turning the world into people. Okay? And that, that's the interesting problem that we're in now. So I think the intelligence explosion started about 10,000 years ago, and we're trying to contain it now. But there are reasons for hope. I'm not one of these total depressives. One thing is, not many people, I mean, some people, and it was tragic, have been killed by nukes. So we've had enough nukes for decades that we could have wiped out all mammalian life if we just shot off 10% of them. But we have successfully been able to govern. Okay, so it's only been a few decades, but that's cool. At least we're still alive. So we can do this thing, and we haven't had too much chemical weapons deaths either, although we have had some, and it's terrible. Human fertility has been falling. So as I said, when you perceive the differences in investment, that indicates, again, that maybe an evolvability thing. We recognize that we're safe now, so highly investing in our offspring may mean that we can damp some of the effects that we're having on the population and on the world as we understand these things. And then one of my other reasons for hope is the EPSRC principles of robotics, which I promised to talk about, but I don't have time. So I'm going to just go through them very quickly. But the robots are multi-use tools. They're not supposed to just kill people. Humans, not robots, are responsible agents. Robots are products. They have to be designed to be safe. They're manufactured, and they have to be transparent. They shouldn't deceive or exploit vulnerable users and make people think that they're more intelligent than they really are, or they have needs that they don't really have. And there's a person with a legal responsibility should be attributed. If somebody crashes a drone into your building, you should look at the license plate and see who owns it. And that should be the same for robots as it is for cars. And the bottom line of all this is that in the UK, it's our policy, although there's no legal bindingness to this, but it's on the Research Council's webpage and of the people who pay for it, pay for AI research. We're obliged to make AI that we aren't obliged to. All right? So this is a regulation, and this is something that if we keep this in mind, that's the goal, instead of the goal being that we're gods and we create these exciting things, then I think we have a better chance of containing the explosion. So I've hit all the things I promised to hit. I've contained the explosion. One of my friends said that it wasn't a clear drawing. Oh well. So I think that the intelligence explosion is a present threat. I'm not someone who's saying it doesn't exist, but it's not because I think that robots are going to take over and become superior and decide we're boring and squash us for fun. All right? I think it's a situation that we're in right now because we keep building technology and only realizing what it does a little bit later. But it's also something that we've been more or less managing, and I think we can continue to manage. The climate change, and also I didn't talk about it because you can only talk about so many things, but the loss of privacy by anonymity, which has huge impact on how well we can govern our government, are real problems. But so far we've been regularly ameliorated. I think we can, and we still should try to attack these things. So yeah, and this is one of the problems I have with people that say that the intelligence explosion might come in 60 years from now. I think we need to communicate an accurate perception, not of giant robots, but of what are the hard problems, how do we govern, privacy matters, environment matters, these kinds of things should be the things we're focusing on right now. But although I do appreciate the long-term vision too and thinking about that. All right, I want to convince you to hire my PhD student sitting here and also my recent postdoc. Even though I just showed you simulations, there are people that use other sorts of evidence than I do. And I want to thank also the rest of my PhD students for putting up with me doing things like this, and some of the people whose data and slides I showed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanna. And we're going to move on to questions now. So as a reminder, questions are also being webcast and recorded. So please wait for the microphone to come to you before you start speaking so that everyone will have the benefit of hearing from you. There's a roving mic going around, so.
Thank you for a really interesting talk. I quite enjoyed those simulations. My question is how much we can trust analogies to biology. Because biology shows how evolving complex systems of a particular kind solve problems and do trade-offs. The problem is, of course, that kind of evolution going on, it might be very different from the kind of development we might be getting in AI. So running genetic algorithms, for example, might have very much similar forms of trade-offs as, for example, the Baldwin effect. But it might be that we might develop AI by very different tools. Yeah. So I wonder how much you trust biology in order to give you a sense of security here.
Thanks. Sorry. I stupidly didn't have pen and paper for myself. Okay, so there was two different parts of what you were just saying, and I wanted to make sure I hit both of them. Right. Okay, so the first one is sorry, don't let me forget to give you a pen. The first one is that, again, from a computational perspective, to some approximation, all learning is the same. And now I just showed you when you have coupled learning that it does throw you into different situations and does speed you up. But so some things, for example, if we get quantum, I don't know how that just happened, it's still here.
I did that, sorry.
You did that, okay.
So you did it blind.
Okay. Yeah, okay, so but you can bring it back if we get a question about a slide. Okay, cool. Right. So we do know that if we have coupled learning systems, that changes the dynamics, and people are studying this. But I think, as an approximation, I'm a fan of Dennett, the universal acid idea that when so long as you have some way of detecting a gradient and you have some way of generating variation, then something like evolution is happening all the time, and it has changed a bit over time, and maybe that's what's happening right now. We're in cultural evolution instead of biological evolution. That's why things are changing fast now. But I think that at a first approximation, it's a pretty good way of understanding. And then the second point, that's why I wanted to write it down so I didn't forget both. The second point is that one of the big things that I've previously proposed, so when I was with you and Stuart Russell and a couple other people in Beijing, Sebastian Jun, when you say what is a specific kind of thing we can do to limit our fear of what's happening in the future, one of the most important things, I think, is not having, if you had almost human-like intelligence, but you had something, if you made something, it was almost like a person. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but in the limit case, you had something almost like a person. What would make them want to wipe out all the people, right? Competition, right? So the desire to be dominant instead of being subordinate. Humans cannot stand being subordinate. I mean, we have all these things to make us happier with our class and our way of life and everything. But basically, any biological system strives to be the best, strives to be the fittest, because that's what evolution does. And if it's not an evolved system, if you say, okay, we're going to learn some other way, we're not going to go with a gradient, we're going to just, we're going to program it, for example, we're going to do something else, then I don't think you have the same problem of creating something that might compete with us. So I think that motivation, this goes back to orthogonality, where does that motivation to compete come from? That's fundamental to evolution. So if we are in another situation that's not evolution, then I think we're relatively safe. So, okay.
All right, we have one right up here.
Hello, it was a very good talk.
Thank you.
I just have a question of clarification, and I apologize if this is a stupid question, but so you concluded by saying that the intelligence explosion is an actual clear and present threat.
Yeah.
But it seemed to me, or at least my understanding of your third part, was that it wasn't, at least not the intelligence explosion in the sense of this singularity nonsense, that instead it already occurred in the sense that it was in nature, it was in humanity, and that there was a danger that would come from increasing this sort of artificial intelligence, but it's in the misuse by humans by our current society, and that doesn't seem to be the same sense of intelligence explosion that proponents of this singularity stuff seem to follow.
If you remember all the way back to my very first slide after my title slide, I told you that one of the main things I was introducing was exactly that difference you've picked up on. So you're right. If you are happy with my redefining intelligence to say, look, it doesn't matter, it's computationally the same, any kind of plasticity, but it sort of does matter. Human culture is going faster, and AI will go faster again. So this is again coming into this. So if you accept all that, then what I'm saying is we're currently in an explosion, and that explosion is accelerating, but we already have AI, so it's already accelerated. but the acceleration is accelerating, so it's true. But we've been sort of coping. We occasionally lose a few million people very quickly through our own inaction or bad actions. But by and large, we keep expanding. Again, follow Hans Rosling. It's amazing. There's actually only like some incredibly small proportion of people born into destitution right now, even compared to a decade ago. It's been, we are doing fantastically well at increasing. That's why in the West we're a bit poorer, but everybody else is doing a little bit better. So we're doing a lot better at helping people. So, but as I said, we do screw up spectacularly once in a while, but not at the existential level. In this panel that I was just talking about that we were in Beijing with Andres and Sebastian and some people, one of the other panelists, I won't mention any names, no one in the room, when I said, something about, people do die and you do get wiped out or whatever, and he said, oh yeah, but only groups of people. I was like, well, that is bad, but again, if you're talking about existential, and groups of people have always died, volcanoes have gone off, whatever, things happen. So can we damp that? So yes, that was the whole point of my talk. The whole point of my talk was to try to say, I'm not, what I love the work that the Future of Humanity Institute is doing, because I think a lot of what they're saying about the intelligence explosion is a great description, but of the problems we have right now. And there's so many people that are saying, who cares about Snowden, who cares that we've lost our privacy, who cares that we have less control over our own government, things like that. And you say, can't you see what's happening around you? Things are moving so fast right now. So I think they've done a good job of describing this, but they're still doing this move that people do. Oh, we'll never understand consciousness. No, wait, I'm Tononi and I figured out a way to prove that we'll understand consciousness in 45 years when Moore's law says that I'll have an explanation of consciousness. Where's Maria? Sorry, I don't think you're a Tononi fan either. You're on this other piece. But a lot of people put things like that just beyond their own lifespan. Either they say not never, or they say longer than I live. And I don't want to see people pushing this thing to 60 years in the future when we have immediate problems that are being well described.
Thank you. And
thanks, Joanna. I just wanted to come back to this question about competition and evolution.
Yeah.
And I think you're absolutely right when you said that the whole thing about evolution is that there's competition there, and you were suggesting that if there's no evolution, then there's no competition. But I actually think things are rather, thinking about the way you talked about bacteria and so on, that things are rather the other way around. I think that in the context of evolution, we not only have competition, but there's a great deal of cooperation and symbiosis and so on as well. So that's why the bacteria can coexist with humans, is because in fact we have a whole ecosystem which has to kind of perpetuate itself with all kinds of organisms, coexisting. So, so the competition is only of a certain sort that allows many things to coexist, so the bacteria is still there. Whereas, in the kinds of nightmarish scenarios that the Future of Humanity Institute likes to imagine, and I think that we should take seriously, the competition that you have is actually very different from that. It's where you, perhaps accidentally, construct something that's a very powerful optimization process that wants to grab as many resources as possible in order to achieve its goals, and that places it in competition with humanity, with the rest of nature. In fact, in a very different kind of way that doesn't leave room for cooperation in an ecosystem, but it just potentially could want to grab everything. So it's like the competition between two extremely hostile corporations that one wants to just take over the other, and everything it's got.
Okay. So I like the first half of your question, and then I'll come back to the second half. Okay. So the first half, you actually brought up something that I did have kind of buried in the middle of the talk, but I'll come back to and point out again. Just in the framework of this question, I talked about the most dangerous thing is this evolved desire to be more dominant, right? And that's because I talk a lot about, more often I talk about robot ethics. This is my first ever talk about the intelligence explosion. So in robot ethics, it's a little bit different. We're really talking about human-like things. And so then we talk about this, my standard line is robots should be slaves, and people are horrified. So we're talking about why would a robot not want that? However, you're right, you're absolutely right. And that was what I was saying earlier with that model of altruism. The cooperation is, despite the fact we're competing for resources, we wind up cooperating because that's the best way to survive. And that's mostly because it isn't, well, first of all, we've been built on the scaffolding, so we are, something like 90%, non-human microbia in these bodies, right? So we're built on the scaffolding of the life that was already there, as AI will be, as AI already is. So we can't have that scaffolding go away. But secondly, it isn't worth the cost, and this is back to Daniel's dissertation, it's not worth the cost to us to wipe out all the cockroaches. I mean, we kind of try to wipe them out of our houses, but we're never going to wipe them out altogether, all right? And that's because they're really good at it. We're all life, and we never get that. We're 87% the same genetic material as fruit flies. We're just never going to get that big of a leg up on it. So now I can see on your face, you can see where I'm coming at, back to your main question. The question is, are these machines special? And again, I think you've reified it in a way that isn't appropriate, because all of life, to some extent, just wants, bacteria are about making bacteria, and if they could snarf up all the resources, they would make all the bacteria. But in a way, they haven't been programmed to do that, because realistically, biologically, they're not going to win. Or they probably were winning for a while, but anyway, now there's a lot of us, right? And so I think it's the same. And as I said, I think with things like the PSRC principles of robotics and other kinds of regulation and building privacy into the internet and anonymity and things like that, we can take deliberate technological actions that will restrict the capacity of these things to outcompete us. And I think we're very good at doing this kind of thing. And we do need to. We need to invest the time, and it's good that we're thinking about it. But I think most likely we will. And I think we'll do it sooner if we're honest about the problems and we think clearly about them. And we do that functional break apart that I asked for on the 7th slide or whatever that was.
What do you think we would do if we found out that cockroaches were an existential threat to us, and if we had the capability to get rid of them? Think about what we did to smallpox.
Yeah, we did actually eradicate smallpox. That's true. We did get rid of those, but the black plague, we didn't manage to get rid of all the rats, right? So you think that if we are now a different kind of thing because we have been able to eradicate a single disease? Yeah, maybe you're right. Okay, that's the best point I've heard so far. But again, this goes back to if that is a threat, then we need to think about damping the situation, making sure that it's more like that their life is depending on us. So remember, we're designing, we're authoring, so this is the kind of thing we can look forward to. Okay. Sorry, you were about the same time as far as I saw.
I noticed in the EPSRC's sort of
Principles.
laws of robotics, there was an exception about national security or the military or something.
Yeah. Can I get my slides back?
Yeah, and it seems to me that that's one reason maybe to worry more, that the reasons you gave for hope don't necessarily apply to some countries and some militaries, that they might, for the purposes or the excuse of national security, build something that gets out of control, even though it's maybe designed to just attack the enemy and then the other guy, So there's that scenario that I didn't hear you talk about.
First of all, the panel who wrote these things really didn't want that exception to be in there. But realistically, it was a funding council, and that is like, I know that the UK is like the 5th largest arm dealer in the world. I don't remember what proportion of our economy it is, but anyway, we weren't going to get rid of it. So anyway, that was, and therefore Noral Sharkey hadn't been invited. I think that's why. But although this wasn't the plan of the EPSRC, they just wanted to have an ethics meeting. They hadn't thought about what would be the deliverable, and we came up with the deliverable. But anyway, that's not the question you asked. What you asked was, what about the rogue states? And I grew up in the Cold War, and I had a great fear that a rogue state was going to push the button, and that would be it. Humanity would be over. And in fact, we know that there were near misses. There was somebody who lost his job in Russia because he didn't shoot off a counterattack in response to a flock of geese. But he didn't push the And had he pushed off the buttons, well, I don't know. I don't know. There's future humanity people here, right? Would they have shot off the 10% that would have required destroying all the planet, or would they just have nuked New York or something?
Probably if Petrov had distributed, there might have been an extra chance of stopping it, but not very large, because this was rather shortly after the Able Archer military exercise, where Reagan seriously scared the Soviets into thinking that he might actually attack. So it was pretty high probability that there would have been a full nuclear exchange, which would definitely have killed at least 300 million. And then there's the big question mark about nuclear winter. We still don't know whether that would have killed a few billion extra.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so yeah, maybe. But and we are fighting these wars now. But so far, the biggest, well, we know that there's entire universities in China that are set up for doing hacking, and that they cause a lot of problems to people like Google. But we also, the main weapon people hear about is the one that was. Okay, nobody officially knows who built it, but it's pretty obvious that it was done with information from Siemens and probably by American hackers or whatever that attacked the Iranian nuclear devices. Somebody certainly knew a lot about Microsoft software. So anyway, these things are happening, and it is a bit like the Cold War, except for that, to the extent to which they've been isolated. Do you remember sorry, old people talk. Do you remember that in the 80s, the internet worm? There was this big concern at the time about whether it would get into the military computers, but they had successfully broken all those off. I guess one of the things I've heard, and I am not an expert on this, but with genetically modified animals, and worry about the ICE-9 scenario of something that just converts all the biomass into dust or something, is that you try to keep the genome's really fragile. So you build it for one thing. You don't have all this redundancy that evolved life has, but rather you specifically make it so that you have the least amount of instructions you could possibly have to get the job done. So then if there's a single mutation or anything you didn't expect, it just dies. It won't work. So we're phenomenally robust, and that's how we can learn. So we can have corruption, and it actually has utility. So maybe that's one of the things we should be thinking about as well with these systems, is making sure that if anything we don't expect happens, they just fall over. But yeah, I'm not saying this stuff is easy. I'm saying that so far we've been managing it, and that we should continue to manage it, and that AI is no greater threat than these other technological hurdles, and in fact it might be one that will help us think better about how to handle the other ones.
Sorry, I can verify that we didn't get rid of the rats. I saw one in my garden this afternoon. I'm very, very interested in your talk. And as an art historian myself, find myself always slightly out on a limb in this place where the arts don't get a great look in, I think. But if one looks at how artistic communication is generated, it's really part of an enormous family of attractions, a lot of which we deploy commercially, a lot of which we deploy politically, and some of which we rather purify and stick on the wall, or at different ages convert into rites of passage to provide societies, or the more static societies, with sufficient degrees of internal mobility. And I just wonder, when you and so many highly intelligent people talk about artificial intelligence, and when in the later part of your talk you talked about, well, we can probably deal with the robots because their intelligence is manageable. Where might appear in this whole story, Heisenberg once said, I think, that when our understanding of the world was better developed and physics was better developed, there would be categories like history and affection would again enter the story. And I think it's affection, in a curious way, which art quintessentializes in one sense, the ammo as opposed to the cogito, so to speak, which is such an enormous feature in our culture in various ways, and yet which never enters into the discussion of intelligence. So, as an art historian, I raise my tiny finger and wonder whether that's absolute nonsense, or whether there is in fact not something missing from
Okay, I think
what he's talked about as artificial intelligence, if it's going to encompass what we do.
I think I almost entirely agree with you, except for that last part that it doesn't come in at all. It maybe doesn't come in quite enough. But I do think that actually what that reminds me of a lot, and one of the things that we will be seeing, and we know that we're already seeing, is this issue of productivity being done more and more by automation. And so then coming back to one of the things I've been strongly advocating, and you saw bits of it in this talk, but if you read my other AI ethics talks, you'll see it stronger, is a human-centric perspective that we need to embrace and appreciate who we are. Because some people say, well, maybe culture is more important, and maybe machines can generate culture better than we can. But all of our culture is based on our own semantics, our own meaning, which is based on our own emotions and our own values. I mean, and therefore, it would be a pretty arbitrary set of values to have robots going off into outer space propagating if there aren't any of us, the human apes, left. So I actually think we are needing, and we're coming to, I think, we're coming to a period where the social sciences will be the most respected science. Just like when we first had computers, we enabled physics, and then we enabled biology. I think right now we're just getting our heads around, starting to get around social sciences. And I think then ultimately it has to come back to the humanities, because that's what we do, and that's what we are to each other. And so we'll be looking at ways to enrich our lives when it's not all about productivity and just keeping yourself alive. So I I personally like art, and one of the things I love about going to Germany is that art, somehow artificial intelligence then is Künstliche something. And I see the Kunst where I don't always see the art in artificial. But I don't think, if you look at all these things people have been saying, and as I said something about it, I've been using it in a negative way too. But part of the reason we're so wrapped up in this stuff is it is wrapped up in all these narratives that we've come up with, sci-fi, and trying to express ourselves and with this over-identification. So at the same time that I am trying to break this part off and say, well, pragmatically, how do we keep ourselves alive, and how do we create a stable system, and what are the real threats, and what are the ones that are just almost things we, in some horrible death wish kind of way, want to have there that aren't really there? How do we divide all those pieces up and think rationally about the problems we have? At the same time, I've been talking about the separation, and I think ultimately, at the root, my basic assumption is that we do want to make people happy. that should be our main goal, as much as we can.
I know we've still got a couple more out here, Nick and Anders.
Thanks for talking about this. I think it's interesting, and I'm glad you're engaging with some of the arguments that people have made on these issues. I think the biological analogy is an interesting one, and maybe it hasn't been explored as much as it could be. I wonder, though, if we take it seriously, how happy we should be about the prospects if we're using the analogy like humans versus bacteria or other mammals or something.
Yeah. If
that's going to be our analogy, as that's how AI's advanced artificial intelligence would be to humans. So I'm in particular thinking of humans are using a lot of the Earth's resources and energy right now. I think I recently read this Václav Smil book, Harvesting the Biosphere. He's saying one of the things I remembered from that was that we were appropriating like 20% of the Earth's net primary production for human purposes.
Yeah.
And if rather than having a world where humans are in a driver's seat in a significant way, we have a world where some machines that aren't under our control are in the driver's seat in a more significant way. I wonder, I don't know if that's, I feel like if I take that analogy seriously, I'm not ready to be sort of sanguine about it, even if we do survive, if our place in the world and our ability to control what happens going forward is greatly diminished. It seems like something to think quite a bit about and hope that we manage properly.
I totally agree, and I'm trying to remember which slide it was on, and now I've forgotten. Yeah, here it is. I do think that there's, as we saw, and this is one of the things that we should worry about, is that there's this great overuse of the environment. We are losing diversity. There's reasons we want to protect the other species if we can. And you know, we might wind up in one of the Asimov's caves of steel thing where there really isn't anything left, but I hope not. And as I said, it seems that as we start becoming aware of this and making the environment into a moral patient and doing these things, we maybe are going to be able to go back. But I do think that there is this other nonlinearity here, and I do think that we shouldn't do that, basically. We shouldn't build that kind of future. So and that was part of what I was trying to talk about before. I don't think it's a necessary feature of artificial intelligence that it will do that kind of runaway thing that can do what humans have done to our culture, done to the rest of the planet. What we did, we weren't aware of at the time we were doing it. We were just doing what our religions and things said, you know, go forth and be fruitful and multiply and things, and we just thought that was right, and that was what God had told us to do, and whatever else. Now we're starting to get a grip on exactly what the consequences are, and so now we can choose another route. Not only for our own species, but I would say for our species artifacts. And so I think that this does, and this is the thing, some people were very offended by the EPSRC principles of robots. They wanted to create things they had ethical obligations to. They didn't want to be limited in this way. But at least the people in that room made the decision that the best thing to do was to say, we would rather limit our one potential avenue of human expression and human creativity than put ourselves into that existential threat. And so as I said, it's not that I don't believe the intelligence explosion could be a threat. It's that I think, first of all, that it's not something that's off in the future. It's a situation we're in now. And secondly, that it's manageable if we start thinking about the problem right. So no, I agree with you, and that's why I was one of the participants in the evolutionary principles of robots. That's one of the reasons I'm trying to get people into the slavery metaphor rather than our children. So far, it's our Mayan children, which will of course leave us behind, and we'll be the dead old adults, and they'll be the young things. And I don't like that metaphor. I would prefer to keep them part of our infrastructure and help, and for us to figure out a nice way to maintain the planet.
So most of his talk has been based on biology. The other big science looking at self-organizing complex systems is economics. And one interesting aspect of economics is economies of scale. That seems to be a really useful concept. And economies of scale in biology might be very different from economies of scales for software intelligence. So organisms cannot really grow that large because of various physical constraints. It takes a lot of time to acquire the nutrients and maintain them, etc. So you get a size distribution, etc. There are a good reason why there are a lot of small bacteria, because the economies of scale favor having a lot of small things and a few large ones. Now, in the case of software, these economies of scale might be very, very different. So that's both, I think that might be an interesting cause of concern, because the economies of scale might, for example, favor the development of a few very powerful entities. There is also a possibility that this might be good news, because the economies of scale is about coordination is also an important thing. The thing about the great power of culture is that the economies of scale of coordinating with other people have actually been improving historically. And that's one reason we have become less violent. We have societies that are better able to foster trust and actually allow us to set up guidelines and even enforce them to some degree. So it might, of course, be that this is the positive side, that the economies of scale for software might also allow better coordination among software intelligence, which again is not entirely reassuring, because that might just mean all the software coordinates and makes a big XKCD distribution. We get to be the green dots, and it's a very nicely coordinated central blob.
I have to get my head entirely around that, but the first thing that she made me think about is I agree to some extent, even though this was biology and you said economics is fundamentally different. Actually, the model that I built over the weekend, the demographic shift model on top of, was one that was based on economics literature that I'd already built before. You can think of economics as part of the human as a superorganism thing. And one of the things I was pointing towards, but of course didn't have time to go into in great depth, is that we are more of a superorganism than most large-scale fauna because of this incredibly rapid form of communication we can do. So with bacteria, they're basically clones of each other, so they can guess what each other is going to do. But with us, we can coordinate because we have language. Language is amazing. That is the nonlinearity between us and chimpanzees. So sorry, where was I going with that? This is one of the main things AI is doing, and I agree with you. But this is also one of the things that we need to guard against, which is why I think the whole, I wish I had more time to talk about privacy and things, but you can't. And one of, if we made mistakes in terms of like food and pollinators, you know, we decided there was a particular species of honeybee that makes the best honey, and so that's the only pollinator. And the thing about, again, bees are clonal organisms practically. They have one queen and so they're highly related to each other. So they're extremely susceptible to things like fungus. So you don't want to have only one species of pollinator in your ecosystem, right? So I think we're learning to damp that down now at the economic level. We are seeing more diversification and the appreciation of the local. And so I'm a little worried with software that right now it is all going into these single places. And to some extent, Google, I know more about Google than other things, and I'm probably under NDA for why or whatever, but anyway, I know a little bit. You can think of Google, everybody knows about their 20% time or whatever, right? They're almost like a research, sort of a high-tech, you know, valley kind of thing in a company, that they share a lot of information, but they have disparate, varied things. But of course, I think we actually have to be a bit careful. I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm not sure about on the one hand, you're totally right that we get more coordination, we can be smarter because of the communication. But on the other hand, I think, again, we don't want that to focus down to too few. And there's a reason for the antitrust and trying to keep things distributed and having varied solutions. But anyway, I think this might be a little off topic, so I'll give up on it.
And I think that's going to bring us just about to the end of time. So there's a
end of time. All right. Okay.
We're at the end of time. There will be drinks after the end of time, just out to the right. And thank you everyone very much for coming. And let's thank our speaker again.